Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Evidence for Belief, a series which examines evidence for the existence of God. In this episode, we're going to examine the second of three amazing aspects of the living cell, the complex DNA molecule that lies at the very heart of almost every cell. Deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, is an extremely large and complex molecule with two long sides that spiral around each other in the form of a double helix. And it's found in the nucleus of just about every cell in our bodies. But it's not just a dead molecule. In fact, it operates exactly like a computer code. It is a complete set of operating instructions for the formation and functioning of every cell in the human body. DNA, for example, tells every heart cell how each individual cell is to function in its place in the heart. It tells every liver cell how to function, every brain cell and every eye cell. DNA is the complete set of genetic operating instructions for the entire human body, and it sits in the nucleus of just about every cell, a hugely long molecule of instructions that's folded over and over on itself like spaghetti in the nucleus of the cell. And not only is it a very long molecule, it's also very complex. The strand of human DNA contains 3.2 billion base pairs or nucleotides, which are specific individual pieces of instruction, a bit like letters or words. Now, just to help you appreciate how huge an amount of information 3.2 billion bits of information is, the Encyclopedia Britannica contains about 50 million words, but our DNA contains about 3.2 billion words or bits of information. That's more than 60 times the Encyclopedia Britannica. And even if you prefer to equate the nucleotide base pairs of DNA to letters rather than words, that is still 10 times the number of letters in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Our DNA is so complex, it took scientists 13 years to map the entire sequence of individual bits of information in our human DNA molecule, using the fastest computers available at the time. Now, granted, computers weren't very fast back then, at least not initially. But scientists who were part of the Human Genome Project started sequencing or reading the DNA code in 1990. And they ran their computers 24/7, finally finishing in 2003. So it took them 13 years, with computers running constantly, to finally map the entire sequence of human DNA, to work out what specific piece of information was at every point in this incredibly long DNA molecule. Bill Gates, the computer whiz and founder of Microsoft, once tweeted on his Twitter page, "DNA is more sophisticated than any software ever created, and we are exploring its huge data storage capacity." He's absolutely right. Our DNA is unimaginably longer and more complex than the most sophisticated computer program we've ever designed. And we have this amazingly complex software built into every cell of our body. Interestingly, even the smartest scientists in the world can only understand a minute fraction of our DNA. Although we have now mapped the entire length of DNA, meaning that we've now identified the exact sequence of paired nucleotides that comprise the entire length of DNA, we still don't know what most of that information codes for. In other words, what most of it is instructing our cells to actually do. We can still only understand a tiny percentage of the DNA instructions. But what is also extraordinary about DNA is how each cell of the body knows how to read and implement those instructions. And this is where it gets truly mind-boggling, because each cell of the body only reads and accesses that part of the DNA that relates to itself, and it ignores all the rest of the information. For instance, the cells of the eye know exactly which part of the incredibly long DNA molecule contains the instructions relating to itself. The parts of the eye cell responsible for reading and interpreting the DNA instructions then clip and unfold the DNA molecule from the nucleus, copy that part of the instructions that relates to the eye. They read those instructions and implement them, and they completely ignore all the rest of the information in the DNA that relates to other parts of the body. So you see, there's a dual miracle, in a sense, going on here, I think, because not only did this hugely complex operating system somehow come into existence, but each cell somehow knows how to read and interpret the code and to locate only that part of the code that relates to itself. In regard to the formation of DNA in the very beginning, many atheists try to argue that it could have happened by chance, that this vast amount of complex information in the DNA strand could have developed gradually over millions or even billions of years by random chemical processes, accumulating one letter at a time, gradually and incrementally growing in complexity of information. On one atheist website, for example, I've read this argument. A monkey tapping away at random on a computer keyboard would eventually write correctly not only words but also phrases, sentences and even whole books. So given enough time, chance can produce all the information in DNA. But I put it to you that there are two huge problems with this theory. Firstly, it's a statistical impossibility. Consider just the chance, for example, of a monkey randomly typing the phrase peanuts and computers. That's 21 letters and spaces, all in the correct order. The statistical probability of that happening by pure chance can actually be calculated because a typical computer keyboard has 101 possible keys that can be pressed at any moment. So, the statistical probability of this 21-letter phrase being produced randomly is 1 in 101 times 1 in 101 times 1 in 101, a total of 21 times. The number produced is so huge it doesn't even have a name. It would take, in fact, 1 billion monkeys typing randomly for 1,000 million years. But that's longer than the universe has existed. And there aren't just 21 letters in our DNA. There are 3.2 billion nucleotide base pairs or letters of information. And they all have to be in exactly the right order in order for every cell in the human body to function and be alive. Well, that's the first problem, the statistical improbability. The second problem with the idea of DNA developing by random natural processes, and even more problematic, I think, for the atheistic argument, is that in order for a living cell to pass on these supposed incremental additions, the cell has to be alive in order to replicate and pass the gradually accumulating DNA on to each successive generation of cells. But for a cell to be alive and be able to replicate, guess what it needs? A complete set of DNA in the first place. It can't be alive without a full set of DNA. It's impossible. It's a catch-22 situation, if you understand what I mean by that. The first living cell had to come into existence with a complete DNA molecule. Otherwise, it would not be viable. DNA can't have evolved gradually and incrementally over time. So here is the ultimate question, I think, that atheists must face. Where did that massive amount of information come from? Who wrote the genetic program in our cells? And secondly, and as a corollary to that question, who taught the cells of our bodies to read the program? Science just doesn't have an adequate answer to those questions. Random chemical processes can't produce intelligent information. Just as monkeys tapping randomly on a keyboard would never produce the plays of Shakespeare. Random natural processes simply could not have produced such a vast genetic library of information, nor the ability of living cells to read and decode that information. Professor Maciej Gurtijk, Professor Emeritus of Genetics at Torun University, Poland, wrote, The science of genetics makes it clear that at no time in the past can there have been such a thing as a simple organism. All organisms, however primitive they may appear, are complex and bursting with information, and we know that this information must have been there from the very beginning. The only logical explanation is that this vast quantity of information came from intelligence. Every bacterium, every microscopic cell is so precisely programmed that we have to assume that the information contained in them comes from an intelligence far beyond our own. Evolutionists have no idea how this information system was produced. Well, having said that, there are some evolutionists who, in a desperate attempt to explain how DNA could have developed by natural processes, propose that the very first living cells might have been much simpler than today and would have required a much shorter, simpler chain of DNA. For example, an article by a group of biologists published in the scientific journal The Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, volume 93, proposed that the first DNA-based cells might have had only 250 genes rather than the 25,000 genes that our DNA contains today. Now, let me just explain a little bit about genes here. Genes are segments of the DNA molecule, often comprising thousands of base pairs, and each gene codes for a specific function or structure of the cell. Now, it doesn't matter if you don't understand all that. The important thing to understand is that this theory proposes a much smaller original DNA molecule of only about 300,000 base pairs, instead of the 3.2 billion that we have today. So that's about 10,000 times smaller than today's DNA. And so this theory proposes that this much smaller, shorter DNA molecule might possibly, somehow, by some means that we still don't understand, have developed by natural chance processes. But let me explain how ridiculous even this is, because there remain two problems that evolution simply can't explain. Firstly, this supposed first DNA molecule not only had to contain 300,000 base pairs, but each of those needed to be in precisely the right order to make sense, to convey intelligent instructions to the cell. And the second problem is that all 300,000 of these base pairs needed to come into existence at the same time in order to have a complete and fully functioning operating system so that the first cell could be alive and able to reproduce. And even this much smaller theoretical strand of DNA simply could not have evolved slowly and developed over thousands or even millions of years. So what are the chances of 300,000 pieces of genetic information being formed from chemicals via random processes, and all of those base pairs instantly being arranged into precisely the right order simultaneously? Well, in answer to that question, recently the biology department at the University of North Carolina published a paper on their website estimating this very probability. And they calculated that the chance of 300,000 base pairs being somehow arranged in exactly the right order by random natural processes is 1 in 10 to the power of 90,000. That is one chance out of 1 with 90,000 zeros after it. Now you might think, okay, that's a long shot, but given enough time, perhaps it could happen. But that's precisely the problem. You see, because there hasn't been enough time, not nearly enough time for that to happen. According to evolutionists, the universe is 14.5 or thereabouts billion years old. Now, in terms of seconds, that's 4 to the power of 17 seconds. And even if the random mixing of chemicals was somehow able to produce a complete new DNA molecule of 300,000 randomly ordered base pairs every second, a new DNA molecule every second since the beginning of the universe, only 4 to the power of 17 molecules would have been produced by now. And that is nowhere near 10 to the power of 90,000 molecules that would be needed to be randomly produced before we had any chance of producing a fully functioning DNA molecule with all 300,000 base pairs in exactly the right order. And, of course, all that assumes that there is a DNA producing mechanism somewhere out there in nature capable of producing a new randomly ordered DNA molecule every second. But the fact is there is no such natural process or laboratory or factory that exists in nature that we have either observed or successfully theorised to date. And that includes the highly theoretical and deeply flawed RNA model. Let me explain that one very briefly. The RNA model proposes that instead of a DNA molecule, the earliest cells might have contained an RNA molecule, a slightly simpler molecule, which contained the genetic instructions for the cell. But this model has met with serious opposition, not just from creationists, but also from scientists who are trying to support evolutionary worldview. They point out a whole range of problems, including that RNA is inherently unstable, that it's too complex a molecule to have developed prebiotically, and that there is no possible catalytic process that could explain its evolution into DNA eventually. But I think the ultimate killer for all of these theories is the simple fact that we don't observe DNA molecules forming by natural processes today. It just doesn't happen currently in nature. And we have no viable explanation as to how it could have happened in the past. You see, atheists are left basically proposing we can't see RNA or DNA forming in nature today. It just doesn't happen, but we choose to believe that it did happen once because the only alternative to that is belief in a creator, and that is unacceptable. You know, it's just nonsense. It's complete nonsense that the incredibly complex information system contained in our DNA could somehow have formed itself by random chemical processes. Now, I'm an author, and I've written over 20 books now. I think at this point in time it's about 25 or 26. The average word count is about 60 to 70,000 words per book. Now that equates to about 500,000 letters and spaces per book. Nothing like 3.2 billion letters that are in our DNA. Now, I would love to set my computer to start randomly typing letters and spaces onto the screen and walk away for a day or so, have a nice relaxing day, come back and find that it's written a whole book for me. I would love that, but I can tell you that it would never happen. I could leave my computer running for a year, for 10 years, for a lifetime, for 1,000,000 lifetimes, and it would never write a coherent, logical book using purely random letters and spaces assigned by chance. Even after 1,000,000,000,000 years, it would still be gibberish. Now you might be sitting there thinking, hang on, we can do this now with AI. Artificial intelligence software is now writing whole books by itself. Yes, but here's the thing. I want to point out to you the key word in that phrase, artificial intelligence. It's the word intelligent. You see, to produce something intelligent, you need intelligence in the first place. AI programs can only produce intelligent information that's logical and coherent because we've programmed those AIs using our own intelligence. Intelligent information can only come from pre-existing intelligence. It can't be produced from non-intelligent, random chemical processes. The only thing that random processes will ever produce is gibberish. What I'm saying is that the human genome, our incredibly complex and sophisticated DNA software, can only come from a pre-existing intelligence. It could never have been spat out of a random chemical soup in a primordial swamp. That is just utter nonsense. I recently read a statement by the Professor of Biology at the University of North Carolina in an article he posted on their website, and he said this: "The problem of abiogenesis," now that's the concept of the first cells coming into existence with a complete set of DNA in the beginning from non-living matter by chance, random processes, right? "The problem of abiogenesis is very severe indeed for the theory of evolution." Well, that's an understatement. It's not just a very severe problem, it's impossible. The human genome, our DNA, screams out that there is an intelligent designer, a pre-existing intelligence that has created this incredibly complex genetic coding within us. The Bible has a name for this pre-existing intelligence: God. And I think it takes much more faith to believe that our incredibly complex biological coding came from random chemical processes than from an all-powerful intelligent designer. Well, so far we've examined two of the three aspects of living cells that indicate intelligent design: the cell's irreducibly complex physical structures and its DNA, the incredibly complex biological software that lies at the heart of every cell. In our next episode, episode 6, we're going to explore the third amazing aspect of cells that provides evidence of an intelligent designer: the incredible world of molecular machines that operates within our cells. And I'll preempt that episode by simply saying, prepare to have your mind blown. If you think the things we've discussed so far about the cell are impressive, wait until you see this. Don't miss episode 6. It is truly stunning. For more information, you can check out my books, which are available on my website, smartfaith.net, where you can also subscribe to my weekly blog. Thanks for watching episode 5. Please check out episode 6. And in the meantime, have a great day.